Janet, leave it on. Or you said you had the recording ready to go? All right.
So we do have a quorum. Reminder to make sure your microphones are on when you want to speak. We need to glance at the minutes, see if we need to make any corrections or changes.
Did I, if I missed it, forgive me, did you adopt the agenda yet? Was that done?
No, sorry.
Okay.
I guess.
You
while
need to
we're
do
looking
that
at-
prior to the minutes, sir.
Do we need to make any changes or corrections to the agenda then?
Move to adopt the agenda as submitted.
Motion's been made and seconded to adopt the agenda as given. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Back to the minutes then. Unusually long set of minutes here. We must have had a long meeting.
Move to adopt the minutes as submitted.
Second.
Okay, motion is made and seconded to adopt the minutes as submitted. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, new business, we have two cases. Case number SUP-07-18-24, Trail Bites by Cake Crumbs, an SUP application introduction. Renee Balfour, the owner, and Mary Woodward, the leasee, have filed a special use permit SUP application to operate a general store located at 37 Courthouse Road, Kriegersville, Virginia, and further identified by tax map number 21-47C. The property is zoned as agricultural, A1, and it contains 0.0293 acres. The property is improved with an existing 312 square foot brick building. The applicant is proposing to operate a general store in the existing building. And a note here, VDOT has site visit scheduled for 8/22/24. The VDOT approval letter has been received and waiting on VDAC's response. Anything to add, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. As you just stated in that overview, VDOT does have a site visit schedule with Ms. Woodward tomorrow on site. So while we don't have that information today, my apologies, but we do fully feel like we will have that comment before the joint meeting on September the 4th, that first Wednesday. Health Department, the approval letter was received. The only thing Health Department is asking for is once Ms. Woodward obtains the VDACs, I guess they have a permit or some kind of certificate, that a copy of that is given to them for their records. Other than that, there was no, they are acceptable what has been applied for. And you can ask the applicant this about any status from VDACs. We haven't received any approval yet, but all indications are that should be forthcoming. One notable change, there was discussion on this at the last time, and again, this is the second workshop on this particular application, but during the last process, a comment was made whether it should run with the land or the applicant, and we made the change because I believe the purview of this commission was it should run with the applicant. So if you go with the and I'll bring it up on the screen, the special use permit application, specifically the conditions, we did make that change. Let me bring that up. I have it on the screen before you, and it's also in your packet, denoted in red text that we made it run with the applicant. So that was a change from last time. I think there was some questions about ADA. We did go to the building official for comment on that. I provided that in your packet. So as far as building codes related, Jamie doesn't see anything. However, ADA, they have their own guidelines, and generally when compliance is considered, or if they were doing some kind of audit or review or follow-up, that would run through DOJ. But as far as the building official side, he is not requiring any upgrades. That doesn't mean that there may or may not be any concerns that commissioners have here tonight. I have asked, or given Mr. Gregg an update on those concerns, so he may have some comment, should that arise from the commission. But there is nothing from the building code side that would trigger an ADA upgrade. This building, as specified, is shortly over 300 square feet. There is no remodeling or no additions done to the building, which certainly I think those things would then trigger some type of review for access. Initially, when this came through the development committee, we were looking at it as a restaurant/caterer. That group or committee felt like that did not meet the kind of spirit of that, and that's why a general store was chosen at that time. This is will be food prepared off-site, brought to this location. I'm probably going to butcher the description of how it would be displayed for sale, but it would be prepackaged, so no food prep on site, just the sale of those items. And that's where VDH has looked at it and said, okay, gray water, all that stuff, any water you need, or gray water would be hauled away from the site to be disposed at Ms. Woolward's current location, her other business known as Cake Crumbs. So that is what staff has for feedback on ADA as it pertains to the building code. So those were the updates from last time, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to take any questions you all may have for me, or certainly the applicant is here tonight as well.
Okay, any questions for Jonathan?
Mr. Chairman, I've got a question that, on that, number one, the special use permit is transferable and shall run with the applicant. I mean, you kind of went over this. So for one thing, is this applicant or applicants? Is this, are both the owner and the, who is this going to be with? And if it's transferable, how do you transfer it if it's going to run with the applicant?
Very good question, sir. I think the issue you raised there maybe be more appropriate, that it's a little more clarified that it's going to run with the applicant, that it's not transferable.
Okay.
I think that should have been edited when the changes were made with the applicant. So if the commission's fine with that, very good point. I will update that. It runs with the applicant solely. It is not transferable.
Okay.
So if there's a future use or someone that wants to either obtain that business or use that location for something else, they would have to come obtain those approvals. So very good point, Mr. Snyder. As far as is it an applicant or co-applicant, initially when it was filed, it was filed with Ms. Balfour, who owns the property, as well as Ms. Woolward, who's looking to be the leasee. I don't have a problem either way if it's a co-application, just understanding that that this SUP being considered would be strictly for the applicant, being Ms. Woolward. So it could be both. If we want to look for more clarity, I don't think there's a problem with it being solely for Ms. Woolward. I think it is good to note that the owner of the property is aware of it, supports it, doesn't have any negative feedback or would not be approval of the use. So I think for clarity purposes, to fall in line with Mr. Snyder's questions, maybe we should revise it as well, where the application is just strictly with the leasee, the applicant, not Kent's, being Ms. Wilbert. If that's fine with the commission, I will make that change. If Ms. Wilbert has any concerns on that, she certainly can address that tonight, but staff recognizes those good points and will make those changes.
Okay, that's a good point. It brings it in line with the actual permit application. It's marked as leasee. Any other points or questions?
I got a couple of questions, Steve. And I'm not opposed to this, but I do got concerns. Jonathan, we had a conversation, and I read very clearly what our building official said and what the code was there. I also took time to call and talk with the ADA people. And the ADA people are federal, not state. And the ADA people told me they didn't care if you were selling grasshoppers. If you were open and you were selling to the public, you need to be ADA accessible.
So, forgive me, Sean. Sean.
Soon they forget.
I know, my apologies. I'm going to bring up, Kim reached out to ADA. They provided a checklist. I get the feeling that, this is just my interpretation, I'm not representing the board, but after reviewing that checklist, in the conversation that was had with this individual from ADA, is that you're never going to receive a letter from them that says, we don't want you to do anything to either, to an existing building. What they have in that checklist, and I provided for legal to review, and let me get to it, they have a term, here we go. Replace requirements for public accommodations. The decision of when it's readily achievable to do so, easily accomplishable. I haven't asked Ms. Wilbert to put this in writing. Accessibility made me think of something that I approached with, and I think this is relevant. If it's not, Mr. Chairman, call me out of line. I remember a conversation I had with our prior registrar when their offices were located on Thrift Road. And there was a comment made to me by a citizen or someone that door's too heavy. They had an accessible ramp, but the door was heavy. And I was like, well, can't we just go buy a wireless doorbell and you put a note up there? And they did that. And actually, folks, one of my former classmates used that, and it's worked well. I think they even use it now we didn't know COVID was going to exist then, but for their curbside here. So I don't know if that's an accommodation we can ask. The way I look at it is we make ourselves accessible. Like Ms. Gardner has an office in the tourism building, it's upstairs, but she's got a doorbell and a camera, and we know when you're downstairs. So if someone's not manning the visitor center, she comes downstairs to meet them. So if that's something that, not only you, Mr. Elliott, but this commission, would have some consideration, or certainly I don't speak for the applicant, but maybe there are different ways to meet accommodation if it needs to be met. We know that may not be every day, but there's probably workarounds such as I suggested. I'm not an ADA expert, but you are showing accommodations for someone who has that need.
Well, and to that point, I've actually dealt with comparable issues in the past. And there are a couple of odd things. I don't have the ADA regs in front of me. I didn't have room in my car for them. One of the issues that comes up, and really the most important issue, is you've got what they call private rights of enforcement. So what that means, and this is really a caution to the landowner or the business owner, because what they can do is, if I feel offended, this happened to a restaurant just north of Gordonsville on Route 15, but I won't mention the name of it, but if you're there, tell Pam Watson I said, hey, they got one of these letters from somebody, and they threatened action. Of course, they also offered to go away in exchange for payment of money. But what it identified that was significant is the fact that there is, in fact, a private right of enforcement. So this board should be very careful about telling anybody they have a clean bill of health, because there are a number of things in the regulations related to the Americans with Disabilities Act that come into play. One of them, and this is, again, it's kind of obscure, but what I'm gonna call temporary businesses, it really doesn't apply to. I've forgotten, it's like 10 weeks a year or 15 weeks a year. And as I understand it, this may be a seasonal business. And if that is in fact the case, they can make some argument that they are not even subject to these, because, again, they cannot be forced into compliance. That does not answer the question as to what happens to the private right of action. I think as a policy matter, if there are things that can be done, by all means, do them. Alteration in terms of repair and that sort of thing, that's a somewhat difficult area. If you're painting, I'm pretty sure that's not an alteration of any sort. I'm not sure you would have to bring that into compliance. The idea is, and you know, from a policy perspective, it seems to me you would probably want people to make these repairs and do things as well as they can. But unfortunately, the way the regulations are typically written, and you see this with the National Flood Insurance Program most prevalently, where people say, well, I'm not going to do anything because if I do, I'm going to have to spend a lot of money to make these changes. So at this stage, based on what I understand the amount of time the property is going to be opened and what I understand the actual work that is going to be done, I don't know that the county goes so far as to say you're in compliance with the ADA, but the county can, I think, comfortably say the county believes that you are in compliance with the state building code, state building regulations, and the local ordinances. But don't give anybody any sense that if there is one of these private rights of action, or if somebody decides to involve someone from, I guess it would be the Justice Department, in something like this, they could conceivably do that. So that's not much of
Mr.
a
Chairman, we,
Yes.
I have experience with doing this for each of our polling places each year. We get a checklist now from the state. We've got 2 Voting Rights Acts, federal, the ADA, and there are 2 different state pieces of legislation as well. We go through them. On the ADA side, which is the most onerous, there are the private rights of action. We do get hit occasionally from some NGO do-gooders that don't like push buttons. They prefer levers on the storm doors to one of our polling places. So we just keep the door open. That's the accommodation. But we found when we had to go through this 32-page checklist that just got imposed last year, that most all the facilities here predate ADA. And so we're golden with that regard unless there's a significant modification. Nobody knows what significant is, but even if there is one, I mean, it has to come into compliance unless it's onerous. We have one of the polling places that extended beyond a steel framed door, and that door stayed inside the passageway of the existing facility. It does not meet the requirements, but because it's part of the framework of the building, we didn't have to tear down the building and reframe it so we're okay on that. But, you know, as Mr. Gregg says, it's the private right of action that gives us fits. But the fact that this building, I'm sure, predates the effective date of the ADA, and it's set in the regs. It's buildings built before the date of enactment. I don't know if a change of use triggers anything. Since this was previously a residence way back when,
Sitting here, I cannot answer.
It was originally, it was well, I need to go back and check the route. I know that was one of the original Verizon buildings before they built next door. And then it was a barber shop at one time. Marty McGetrick would tell me about the days he'd get his hair cut there when he first moved to the area. But that's a good point of change of use. I guess if I can come back to an idea, and certainly the applicant's here tonight, you can ask questions and whatever you normally do. Is it an acceptable practice or would be viewed as such, at least by this body, if someone is trying to accommodate, whether it's signage, call this number for accessibility, or someone that's inside, you hit a bell, if you need it, they come outside, so you are trying to accommodate someone that way. They can bring you a menu, they can bring you what you need there curbside. Is that something that this commission would recognize as an accommodation to meet that effort? There's pictures in your packet of this location. You know, one of the things I would say, I mean, if you would even expect a ramp or anything to this place, you're getting pretty close to the road as it is. But I go back to, with this body, or this commission rather, look at that as that suggestion I made, not the applicant, that's me. I did not put that in writing, and you can answer that question tonight, but would you view that as a good measure of accommodations? There we go, I've got it on that's a front view, and then here's your side view where the power pole is that's the building, and there's the road. But would this body view that as an appropriate accommodation to meet those with ADA?
Yeah, and does anyone else have a question for John?
Go ahead, Mike.
So one of the questions would be, if it needed to be ADA, what would have to be done? Have we looked into that yet? I mean, is there a lot of construction that would have to do to meet that standard, or?
So normally, and not all ADA is just someone in a wheelchair, things of that nature. But if you're thinking of accessibility to even enter the building, you would, that checklist shows measurements. So you would measure your door. How would someone be able to enter your building, whether they are walking or needing to use a wheelchair? So you would take measurements. This checklist here talks about doing a survey, list barriers and solutions. They've got slopes here for ramps and all that mentioned. I think that would be the approach if there were some renovations or things being done there, to Jim's point, and it's not just solely related to this building. There are many of those older buildings, and they go back to what is reasonable, what's their term here? Because there's standards before construction prior to 2012. Let me bring up the standard. What is easily accomplishable and readily achievable? So, I mean, they leave it very broad. If it applies, and I tend to what Mr. Smith was mentioning earlier, due to the age of the building, and there is no new footprint or new construction, I don't think you would go to those measures. I think if there's still concerns beyond that, then maybe consider my suggestion of if the applicant would be able to accommodate, meaning bring the service to the individual that needs the accommodation.
Another thought that I had was that, so it's not in one of the conditions, but it is in the comments on the backside of something here. And in the comments, it says that what she's going to do with her gray water, what we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
If the owner is on the application and she owns both properties, would she not be allowed to take her gray water next door instead of running it all the way back up here to Cape Crumbs?
The way that it was explained, conveyed with the applicant, which is Ms. Wilbert, and the location and activity being 37 Poorhouse, which is the 300-some square foot building we're referring to, it would not be, it was not described, nor the approval from VDH to dump it there. It was always, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you call an applicant, they can definitely speak to that, but that's why it's tied to a different location beside the location next door.
But are we, so, okay, so then, having said that, it was also kind of, because I would have thought that would have been okay. But if not, is that still allowable for them to let people go from that business to another business to use the restroom as part of their, I mean, do they have to let people use the restroom? Is that,
So it's my understanding, because they're not an indoor restaurant, they technically don't have to have a restroom.
okay,
I think that's something that maybe the business owner, or in this case, the applicant, well, you're both. Sorry. I think they had said, recognizing there may be a need, or there was definitely input from this commission last time, a concern about bathroom, is that the property owner, which is Ms. Balfour, would be willing to allow bathroom use at their facility, but VDH is not requiring that. So that's something that the business owner is trying to accommodate those who may need to use a restroom, but it's not required by state agency. And again, the hand washing and disposal, VDH has spoke to that and says, hey, we approve of it being handled off-site, disposed at the Cake Crumb facility, which is located in town, and it's on public utility.
I got two more questions, Tom.
Okay.
One of them is, you're applying for a special use permit for this building here. You're gonna use this building over here for the restroom. Shouldn't both of those buildings be under special use permit? Because it appears to me you can't use one without the other.
Well, and where's Hannon when you really need him? I guess it depends on whether a bathroom is required. If this is carry-out food, I'm not certain that a bathroom is required. But if somebody needs to go to the bathroom and a neighboring business is willing to permit it, I think that they're okay. I think that's a health department question, and I don't know the answer to it as to whether bathroom facilities are required in order to sell like this. I'm guessing this is roughly akin to a food truck, and they typically do not have bathroom facilities under the theory that, it's food one carries away, you eat it, away from the place, and, if you need to use a restroom, you go to McDonald's or, wherever the other business might be.
Yeah, I think, and that's certainly up to the applicant. They could say, well, we'll remove that and not make that part. I do know where the other property, which Ms. Balfour owns that, known as the Possum Store, originally why that was even brought in conversation was trying to accommodate parking, because it is a little tight in that area. You have the Possum Store that anchors the corner of the Turnpike and Poorhouse Road. And then there is an easement, a driveway that goes to an abandoned house. And then there's the area of 37 Poorhouse Road, which is where the special use permit is being applied for. So as far as what would be needed of that property and why it was in here is having parking, and I can bring up pictures, but that would be associated with the Possum Store. The bathroom, VDH is not requiring. I think the applicant had mentioned that just based on concerns of the commission of what if somebody needs to use a restroom. And Ms. Belfour has said, hey, they can use this one. I don't think it has to be a part of it. If it's clear on the commission and the desire to ask the applicant to say, don't even make that part of the condition, that I think is appropriate. I do think it's important that where it would need to tie that property, that other property, which is known as the Possum Store, is the parking. You definitely need parking for this establishment because it is so tight to the road, and you certainly can't block that driveway to that, even though it's an abandoned house, the blue house. If you drive out there, you can't block access. So I don't know if I answer your question. I guess what I'm looking for is guidance from the planning commission and also feedback from you all to the applicant is if there's concerns, if VDH is saying you don't need a bathroom, and that's a concern of the commission of, well, why should that be in there? And maybe the appropriate thing is to ask the applicant to remove that. Now they consider that, just understanding that at a minimum, I think you would still need the parking on that other property to be part of this application to have public parking for this business venture at 37 Poorhouse Road.
So Sean, if you remove the bathroom and you do have to have the parking, where we stand then?
And if I may give an example, Sean, and then I'll step out of my apologies. Years ago, the Board of Supervisors approved a special use permit for a child care facility. I think maybe a church was nearby, so they did some accommodations of that parking lot to allow that special use permit as far as parking. So there has been some precedent on, I think that was Miss Lewis's daycare. There has been some precedent on having parking as part of an SUP for another neighboring use.
My question was, if they say, okay, and it's up to the applicant, not us, they say we're not gonna use the bathroom, we're gonna do away with the bathroom, but you still gotta use the other building for parking. So is both of those part of the special use permit?
I think it would still be part of it to the extent that you needed to use the parking lot. But otherwise, no. And if that is the case, if they're not using the toilet facilities, for example, then that gets rid of a lot of the need for, any ADA compliance or anything else. Because at that point, you're a stationary food truck at that point. Because everything is kind of set in place and you're not offering, dining accommodations in terms of a place to sit and eat, and you're not offering, the bathroom facilities either. But a lot of it is necessarily dependent on what the applicant brings before the board.
Jonathan, I have one other question.
Yes, sir.
Being as I sit on the RSA board, we're bringing gray water back and we're dumping it into RSA sewer line. Does RSA need to know that?
It's a good question. It's a good question. Let me, if I may, to get a further understanding, because the water has to originate somewhere too, and that is obviously metered by RSA. The water used, that would be to the premises that would turn into gray water, because you're not using the well on site. Your water source that would turn into gray water, follow me here, I'm being serious, is that RSA water that you would use that would then turn into gray water. Like if you needed to do wash down or something, it's potable water that you would initially get from RSA that you take that would turn to gray water that you're disposing into RSA sewer. So I would think, and I can call Mr. Clemens before the joint meeting, and I'm sorry, I didn't anticipate that question. It's a very good question. I'll get comment from them. I just want to understand clearly her source of water, so that'll help me ask Mr. Clemens. So very good question, Mr. Elliott. I'll bring that back to the commission and the board that night of RSA's response.
Any other questions for John?
I've got, I just want to, Pete, I think one of your points was you were wondering if these things, parking and bathroom, would need to become a part of the Possum Store SUP as well, right?
Yeah.
So Renee, have you got a special use permit for the Possum Store? To do business in an agriculture zone?
I'm non-conforming, so I don't know if it's, I was told, always told that I can function as I am right now, so I didn't need a special use permit. What I'm doing falls under what I have now, which is, I think, it's A1 and something that's combined, but everything is grandfathered in. So,
Yeah, well, that's a different issue. I was, which, it's not,
maybe I'm not understanding.
well, do you have a signed special use permit that I think Pete was talking about would need to be altered to allow the bathroom and the parking to be used by somebody else? You see, if,
Need a special use permit for that?
As to whether a non-conforming use is permitted, that's a fairly fact-specific inquiry. That's probably something you might want to research a little in terms of how long has your use been there? Has it been continuous? Has it been discontinued for a period greater than 2 years? And there are several other requirements, which, again, I do not have in front of me. Hannon knows them, but I don't have that in front of me.
I'm thinking that's where you were going with that. Did I understand?
When we started this process and we were, with Tracy, Jamie and Tracy, and Tracy said that what we were doing was permitted, and that because everything, there's, Blossom Store is grandfathered in, with what it's doing, what it has done. So Tracy said that this was permissible. So that's all I know. But my understanding from her was that I didn't need any additional permits, and that it was allowed under the store as it stands.
What year was that?
The store was built.
No, that Tracy gave you that information.
But I think that may have been a review of file from previous staff. So we would have to check that file to answer that question of SUP or uses for the Possum Store property. As far as the special use permit, and I'm going to bring up these, I think Tracy was doing this in a different format, but these appear to be the conditions as they exist. And I caught another adjustment that needs to be made, similar to what Mr. Snyder was referencing. Hold on, I'm totally going through the next case. Give me 1 second. I don't claim to be your IT guy. Let's go to the conditions. Here we go. All right, so let me just run through these real quick, because this is what it's being conveyed. So number one, definitely needs to be edited to make it clear it runs with the applicant, it's not transferable. Number two, it's not we have that as a special use permit as an indefinite permit. But again, making it clear it runs with the applicant, so that was a change. And I know, Renee, you just came in, but it's gonna run solely with Mary. The good thing is you have been in the loop, and it's not like it's an adverse situation you're in agreement with. Number three, the proposed use and building shall be or remain in compliance with all county ordinances, unified statewide building code, and all applicable local, state, and federal law and regulations. So even beyond the special use permit, we're saying that, hey, it's the applicant's requirement to stay in compliance with all those other non-county type of regulatory. Four, an existing fence that is on the property shall be maintained to provide buffering. So there's a fence that kind of wraps around the back. It's just saying that must be maintained for a buffer. Even though that house behind it's abandoned, it does provide a buffering should that house or property ever be occupied. Five, any lighting as provided on the property shall be directed downward so as not to produce a glare onto adjoining properties or indoor any roads or right-of-ways. That's been pretty standard. We've said that with other businesses of having downward-facing light. Parking is prohibited in the VDOT right-of-way, which is known as Poorhouse Road. Parking is also prohibited in the gravel driveway that serves tax map number 27-47B, and that's the current abandoned home, but that is the access that serves that. All parking spaces shall be clearly identified on site. That's what's illustrated in your photos, and that's what brings in the Possum Store parking by the black fence if you happen to travel up to Poorhouse Road. Any change of use or expansion of services not included in the special use permit will require an additional new or modified special use permit as required by the Madison zoning ordinance. So any change of use or someone says, hey, I want to add an applicant or change ownership, all that would trigger a modification or a new special use permit. The zoning administrator or their designee may visit the site during hours of operation to ensure compliance. So we would be tracking if we got a call. We're always complaint driven. We don't just drive around regularly looking at things unless it's complaints. We would check to make sure that what's cited here is being complied with. And then 10, the special use permit may be revoked upon material noncompliance with the terms of the permit or upon violation of any terms of zoning ordinance. And that's pretty standard language. The goal is that folks would always comply. And if there was any noncompliance, you give them what is known as a right to cure or a time to cure, meaning to correct. We don't just go out there revoking permits right away. We give people the opportunity to correct. So those are the special use permit conditions. So I will make that change to number 1. There's not a bathroom listed in this, but I do know the applicant as well as the owner of the property says, hey, if that's a concern that was raised here at the last meeting, they're willing to allow use of that bathroom, but it's not a special use permit condition. So as far as the special use permit's concerned, you all reviewing, or if this was approved as is, staff that would be reviewing compliance, we wouldn't be checking for a bathroom because it's not in the conditions. However, I think if that's a concern here tonight, I would strongly recommend discussing with the applicant what you feel is appropriate and like to see, so we can either add something to the special use permit that addresses that, or understanding that that will be a condition, or BDH said a bathroom's not necessary, so you don't even need that other accommodation. But clearly, to go back to how one property ties into another, they do need the parking as a condition listed in the special use permit that is on the Possum Store property, still owned by Ms. Balfour, for the use as functioning for the trail bike business that's being proposed to 37 Poorhouse Road.
To clarify a couple of points, the VDH letter here does specify employees will have permission to use the bathroom facilities next door. I think they're just concerned about an employee being there for long periods of time, being able to have access. It doesn't specify whether the customers can use anything.
Correct.
Another question, based on the size of this building, how many parking sites are required? Is it like 2?
So it's, and I can bring up the ordinance, I believe it's 1 per, it's 100 and, yeah, I think it's 150 square feet.
Oh, so even if we assume it's 2 in any part, it would be 3 at most?
It's 3, and one of those 3 would be for handicap parking.
And so we're now saying that any parking would have to be across that drive on the Possum Store property?
Correct.
There's not room enough?
No,
this?
sir. That is, I can bring up the picture. I'm sorry, I'm going between ordinances.
Steve, you've got one for handicap and one for employee,
Right.
you've got one left.
We talked about, Mary and I talked about that already, and I have a lot that's on Turnpike Road, but Turnpike Road, they can use the parking at the end of my parking lot. We already talked about that with the employees, so they would not be taking the parking
again.
as opposed to the building.
So you do have an existing parking lot then? I guess we may as well start talking to you now.
I have 2 existing parking lots, and then an additional with 3 that have been laid out just for trail rides. So there's a lot of parking.
The trail bike parking is going to be in this area by this fence. I know you have photos, but that's the trail bikes. What I'm hearing Ms. Balfour refer to is, and Ms. Wilbert, is that employees wouldn't be here. Employee would be using parking that you have currently in that area.
And the white building on the other side of me, that's Mr. McGettrick's parking, Mr. McGettrick's building. And my parking goes all the way from Possum Store, all the way over to Mr. McGettrick's building. And I do have a marked handicap spot in that lot. And we would be able to bring one in a small lot closest to trail bikes.
So Sean, just to make sure I'm clear, if they use that parking over there to work for this business, that parking don't have to be part of the special use permit.
That's correct. And again, the reason for it is if they've already provided the minimum amounts of parking that are required, then if they have extra parking, we don't care where it is.
And everything's cool until there's a falling out between the parties.
Well, that's exactly right.
It ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, never, never.
Hey, Jonathan?
Yes, sir.
So I was thinking also that I think what we would normally do, all this is kind of hinged on what we're saying that they're gonna do. And what they're gonna do is not prepare any food there. And it's all gonna be brought in. Does that need to be, now, if this was gonna run with the land, we would certainly want to put that in as one of the provisions. That way, that would never be able to be done, because that's the way we're kind of somewhat approving it. But being this is just going with the applicant, we haven't really said that she can bring in food or prepare it there.
VDAX has that authority, so the county doesn't have, the county has authority of what's allowed at that location.
So we don't care as the county.
We
care if
don't,
she
we don't
prepares
have
it or not.
the authority if she's properly preparing the food, where the food is being prepared, if that meets compliance, that's all VDAX. VDH has some tie-in, they're normally tied to come around looking at restaurants, but that's where VDAX, normally if you think VDAX, you think animals and stuff like that. But they have that jurisdiction. So we're looking at the use as far as the county ordinance is concerned. We would not look at, is it allowable for them to prepare food on-site or somewhere else and bringing it there? What I think we should look for is that the regulatory body that has that jurisdiction, are they okay with that? Yes, sir. Item 3 of the special use permit, Ms. Smith, you are correct.
And secondarily, as a general store, that typically does not include in our definition preparation of food on site. That's packaged foods, basically. And that's deliberate, by the way. That was to avoid having anybody say it's a restaurant.
If you'd like me to clarify what VDAX requires, I'm certainly happy to do so. I'm actually working on my kitchen permit now, because my current health report does not, cover this. I'm selling pre-made food out of my Cape Crumbs kitchen, which is on Main Street, at a separate location. So I have to have a commercial kitchen permit, which will be Cape Crumbs. And I prepare the food there through VDAX approval. I will have a certificate, which you guys will receive with this. I'm still working on the approval. It's a long process. They require me to have every single label sent to them for referral, for review. I have to have training, I have to have food safety stuff. All that stuff has to be done for this approval. So I'm working on that now, getting that done. And once that approval is done, then the Cape Crumbs will be the kitchen that I'm preparing that food in, and it's only being sold at Trailblaze. If that clarifies that question for you.
While we're trying to clarify, this is part of your application package, and I remember you talking about it at the first workshop. And this may apply to whether ADA is applicable or not. You're going to be, well, first of all, how many employees are you intending to have at this location? One, okay. And you're saying open Saturday and Sunday, 10 to 2 p.m.? Okay. So 2 days out of a week, even assuming you run all year, which you may not do.
No, I will run probably March through November.
Okay. So we have one employee on site and nowhere near, anything near full-time store. So, and Sean, you had mentioned something about the number of days or weeks or whatever per year, I think. I think what I'm trying to get at.
That is correct, and sitting here, I don't remember. I want to say it's 5 months, but it sounds like you would be the longer you operate, the more likely you are to have to take additional steps to comply with ADA regulations. But, you know, number one, I'm not giving the applicant legal advice, but more importantly, I think that is something that they need to consider for their application. Again, it's more of the private right of action,
Yeah,
which is where I think this would be enforced.
Which exists regardless, basically.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And also, if I can speak to that, I have quite a few ADA, customers that come to K-Crumbs that are very excited about trail bikes and they live in that area. And I want to accommodate them. I don't want to turn people away ever, and I don't want to discriminate. So my thought process on that, if I don't want to have funds to widen the door and put up a ramp, was to put a sign on one of the parking spots, the handicap parking spot, with my phone number to the inside the trail bikes that says, call us, order here, and we can bring it out to you. I don't want to be non-compliant at all. I want to be able to call my customers.
Just as, also as far as I understand, if you're in a handicap ramp, if I'm right, the regulation is 1 foot for every inch, 1 foot of slope of rise for every inch that goes up. So that would be, my guess is, because there's 3 steps there, it's somewhere between 21 and 24 inches. So that would be, you know, 21 feet.
Right, it would stick out in the road.
Of-
Yeah.
And then you need a 4-foot turnaround. So these, that's figured, the piece of land that the building's on. And it would take everything, it would take it out into the road, probably, you know, a foot or two from the road, so I'm not even sure putting in more trees is possible.
And in that regard, there are other limitations in terms of ADA regulations, one of which is that the accommodation cannot cost more than 20% of the total cost of the project. And again, it's a very arcane area. It's very regulation intensive. I'm not certain that this board is going to be able to accomplish anything with regard to this, other than to advise the applicant to make sure that they have done what they need to do to make sure they don't get that letter, you know, telling them that they're not in compliance.
Yeah, Jonathan, have we determined whether or not this is in the floodplain? It is in the floodplain. That also limits what you can do in terms of remodeling or,
And it's the same types of issues.
Yeah.
And that one, you're allowed to do up to 50% of the value of the improvement, after which it has to be brought into compliance with the most recent, you know, flood zone construction standards.
Just for a practical note, you're not gonna be able to do the cell phone thing because you have no coverage there. So you're gonna,
Hopefully it works.
wait,
But I can do the doorbell.
yeah,
honk the horn. It's very quiet there.
that's right.
Just
Back
like,
in the old days, pull up in the gas pump and honk the horn. There you go.
I got one other thing, Steve. Jonathan, on the SUP permit, item number 9, it's checked off there as a private well. There is a private well there, correct?
There is an, let me go through that, because there's a well.
But we will not be using it.
Yeah, and I think it's, and I may be getting ahead of my skis, but I know VDH look at, let me get on my microphone. VDH looks at existing wells, and they also go back through their records. Do they have it on file or not? And when was the last time used? So I believe that's why they clarified in their letter and their conversations with Ms. Wilbert that it's understanding you will not be using that well as part of your business, and that's why she's bringing the water on site. But that's why that was checked, because we look at that as a, even though the business will be happening in the building, we look at the whole site and how it's currently zoned and the acreage and is it in the floodplain and all of that. So that's why that was marked.
It seems to me, Mr. Chairman, I think we were kind of tracking along the same path, is that the minimum parking requirements seem to be met, so that's really, I don't think we need to consider that too much. It seems like the bathroom requirements are met, except VDH's requirement, or I guess it's a requirement as far as the employees being permitted to use the Possum Store restroom, and I don't know if that's something that we need in that special use permit condition, or if that's just sort of governing itself. Are the hours of the stores, like when Cake Trail Bites will be open, Possum Store is also open at the same time?
Saturday and Sunday, 10 to 6 on Saturday, and 10 to 4 on Sundays. So my hours are 7 to 6. They'll be open at the same time.
At least for now, and then otherwise, I mean, I guess accommodation would have to be made as far as giving access to an employee to meet VDH requirement. And other than that, I didn't really see a whole lot of problem.
Yeah, and like Pete said, I don't think we're actually trying to shoot anything down. We just want to make sure that any potential problems are taken care of ahead of time.
When they said one more thing about the bathroom, access to the bathroom through the back door is fairly close to the small building. And when you go in the back door, the bathroom is right there. There's, the length of the building, about a third of the building, is along that side with another inside, with another door that goes into the main part of the store. So what I will be doing is giving her employees the key that gives them access to that. So if for some reason that they're at 9 o'clock doing the work of that one, they will always have access to it.
Okay, any questions for the applicant? And kind of like Sean says, I can't actually give you advice, but if it were me, I would not say anything to customers about a bathroom being available.
I mean, I will put a sign
Right.
that says no public restroom.
That has to be taken care of on their private. Any other question, comment, discussion on this? Okay, any other potential problems? Okay, thank you. If there are no other is there any public comment? No public comment? Is there anybody online?
I don't think there's anybody.
I've got to start remembering to ask that. I don't see anything up there resembling a. Yeah. Okay, while Jonathan's looking at that, what is, do you know what VDOT is coming to the site to look at? Are they? Don't know.
VDOT, they come and measure, the location of the structure through the road. They look at site distance too. So they'll come out and measure where the stop sign is and the intersections. I did speak with John Wynn specifically about this. He's not the one that comes on site. There's someone else within his division. But, sometimes if you just give things to VDOT, they'll say, go look at Appendix K of the Century. And I said, John, y'all really need to go out on site. Like, this building is right there. And so they take measurements and then they make the comment. They just were not able to get out before this meeting. But I wanted to let you know that was scheduled per VDOT for tomorrow, actually, and we'll bring those comments back.
Yeah, I was just curious. I mean, this is a building that's been there for years. It's a private driveway that's already there. The intersection's been unchanged for 50 years or 100 years.
Agreed. There shouldn't be an issue, but just our standard practices, we work with VDH and VDOT or any other agency, in this case, VDOT is involved, to make sure we have their review. So it's a full application and consideration for the commission and ultimately the Board of Supervisors when they are reviewing and making a decision.
Okay. Any other discussion on this case? That being the case, and no public comment. Next case is case number RZ-08-21-24, Madison Wood Preservers Incorporated, a rezoning application. This is an introduction to it. Madison Wood Preservers Incorporated has applied to rezone a roughly 3.71 acre parcel from R2 residential to M2 general industrial. The subject parcel is currently vacant land. If rezoned, the applicants intend to expand their receiving department. The parcel is identified on Madison County's tax maps as 39-95. Jonathan, anything to add there?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking in the audience. I do not see a representative from Madwood tonight, but I'll go ahead from a staffing side, and I will loop back in with representatives of Madwood tomorrow, and just, I'm not sure why they're not present. As you may recall, the former residents, the Oots property, used to have a house on it. It's on the corner of Route 29 northbound in Oak Park Road. Madison Wood acquired that property later. Good exercise for the fire department. They demoed, so there are no structures on that site, just vacant property, and that is the 3.71 acre parcel that is being requested to be rezoned. That was R2 property. They are requesting it to be rezoned to M2 General Industrial. Staff feels like that's in line when you look at, and forgive me, I'm in Criggersville. I need to move back to Madison. That is the actual zoning. If you look at the other uses, and most of which the blue that you already see is Madison Wood. So the parcel we are referring to that's currently R2, I'm going to highlight it, is there. That's R2. Their plan for expansion would include this site, and I'm going to go through their slides here in a minute. But that plan for improvements would be this site as well as some activity on their existing property. So they do plan for a boundary line adjustment. I believe it's 6 or 7 acres of activity total that would encompass this project. Madison Wood, if you've been out there, if you have not, I encourage you to, we can always work with the president on getting scheduled for the commissioner to look on site. They use almost every bit of their footprint. So logistics means a lot for them. Trucks, when they come in now, the staging, it generally takes about 30 minutes or more to offload a truck. What they would be looking to do is build new facilities, meaning three-sided buildings to put material in. It does them no good to have material kept outside, and it actually will help the efficiency of their offloading. It could take it down to a 10-minute, maybe 15-minute process. So as you can see, that is a logistics win. I'm going to read from the narrative that Ms. Guevara, the president, provided. That's in your packet, and I have it on the screen too, whichever is easiest for you all. It's known as the description of proposed development for Madison Wood Preservers. So again, it would be a rezone. Again, they're looking to do a boundary line adjustment of that 3.71 acres should this rezoning be successful. And there'll be approximately 7 acres that would be excavated and graded to facilitate that future development. Their expansion plan, 3 long-term storage, 3-sided buildings. Each would measure 180 feet by 63 feet by 25 feet. And then 2 short-term storage open buildings to house trailers. Each of those would measure 180 feet by 63 feet by 20 feet. 1 open covered receiving area measuring 180 feet by 126 feet by 20 feet for truck unloading. And they gave a proposed density and total square foot. I realize that's more information than far as rezoning, but I think in fairness it is due as a consideration or understanding for this body of what they're looking to do with the property if you were to consider to rezone it. So what their proposed use is, that would come along later on for a site plan application, which has public hearing, it has your review, it has board public hearing and board review and or approval or denial. So we are currently in the rezoning phase. The development committee meeting met to discuss this, and at that meeting, we always invite our stakeholders. If it's not a public utility, we don't invite RSA or something dealing with that. This has no planned water component unless some kind of fire requirement triggers suppression or a hydrant on site, then certainly we would talk to them, but we're not at the site plan phase at this time. VDH and VDOT was there. VDH would really have no comment on this. This is a rezone, but we did have them here. VDOT, it was clarified to them that if they rezone and were able to move forward with this site plan, there would be a lot of planned excavation. So if you look at that corner lot, it sits much higher as you traverse back down towards the existing lot of Madison Wood Preservers where they have their receiving department. VDOT didn't seem too overly concerned on it. They did say their comments would be reserved during the site plan phase. But they said there's a process, permits and all, in order to do that. So certainly they would have to establish the amount of disturbance, how they're going to handle stormwater. Again, I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm explaining their long-term intent, and that too would be considered during the site plan phase, which they are not at. So this is a rezone. It is for, as they put it, efficiency improvements, safety enhancements, operational capacity, and environmental benefits. Our office and specifically with Mr. Gordon has been working with congressional or maybe even state level to see if there's any grants. Madwood had asked for that, and we always try to help where we can with any business and see if there's any environmental benefit of grants. There's a lot of stuff out there green, so if trucks are not waiting a long time or idling, maybe there's some qualifying. Again, that's not for your consideration of rezoning, just letting you know things that we are trying to look out for maybe some possibilities to help existing business. So again, this is a rezoning application. I don't mean to ramble on, Mr. Chairman, but I did want to give you their long-term plan for that acreage they're planning to rezone as well as boundary line adjustment that would consolidate, or I should say enhance their receiving activities. And I stand by for any questions you may have for me, and we'll take notes if there's any follow-up questions I need to communicate with the applicant.
I got a couple of questions.
Yes.
Our BLAs are restricted to C1 and A, I think. I'd asked the question when we were considering that sometime, why did we restrict it just to C1 and A?
And I'm going to look up, because we just covered boundary line adjustment. You're saying BLAs are not covered in?
Nope, they're covered
They're
in
discussed.
agricultural and conservation.
Let me find they're not labeled, so I'm going through the ones that were recently.
What was the question there? I couldn't quite hear what we're talking about.
Currently, boundary line adjustments, which they mentioned in here, are allowable in A1 and C1. This is an R2. So, and that they're talking about doing a boundary line adjustment.
Would you rezone it before you did the boundary line, or do the boundary line after you rezone it?
It wouldn't make any difference because it's not allowed in M2 either. But they.
And then that's something we can get back to, Jonathan. The other thing was that serviced by RSA water and wastewater, or were the
I think it's
wells
both,
removed?
water and
I don't think there's
wastewater.
no sewer there, I think there's water there.
So the,
I think not for all the activities, but I believe there's a line that's punched under 29. I don't know if that just serviced the office building. And forgive me, I'll ask that question, but I am aware of some sewer, but it's not for all.
because we're sure there's no private well and no septic. I was wondering if they just.
Right,
I'll
check on the water. I do believe there is water there present. I do not believe that the sewer may serve all of that. It may be certain areas. Their primary wells that are on site has to do with their, maybe you can help me out on this, Mr. Gordon. I know- Yeah, it's cooling, and I do think they have some fire capacity built in with that system as well. Yeah, so that's mainly what those wells are for.
Okay,
But I'll bring that back
the
as
house-
clarity
the
for
house
RSA.
didn't have a septic or a, well.
Oh, you're asking about
Yeah.
forgive me, the property being rezoned, about the wells. I will check on that if it's, what's there and if it's been properly abandoned or the planned use for that.
Any other question for Jonathan?
Yeah, on the application itself, I mean, we have the applicant owner as Mr. Bill Price. And I think if you look at the tax map, the tax property, it's actually MWP. So does that need, if we're doing rezoning this, does it need to reflect the same entity?
Let me get to the application, one moment, sir.
Somehow it needs to be presented in the same name.
If they changed all of the assets, it's not unusual for a company to own entities that they used to do business under. Exxon and Standard Oil come to mind, you know, Esso, Humboldt, there's like 15 Standard Oil companies, and they didn't change all the names for whatever reason. Likewise here, it would not be unusual for a company to go through a change of, what I'm gonna call nominal ownership, you know, if the stock doesn't change hands. As a result, you have a variance between the names of the owners of the property
So
and
what's,
the name they go under now.
so let me, and forgive me, so what's the, I'm trying to understand the question. When I'm
So,
looking at the
rezoning
application.
application shows the applicant is the, you know, it says it's the agent, but it's, when
it's not.
underneath it says that the owner is, the name is Bill Price.
Yeah,
But
so
in
it,
actual, the tax purposes, whatever, it's MWP.
right. So maybe we can look at reformatting this. I will explain what's in front, and then we can talk about if the form needs any
Would
additions.
depend on how he bought that property, wouldn't it? He may have bought it in his name.
Well, I think what's being conveyed here, the owner is Mr. Price,
Yeah.
the agent is Ms. Garvara. At least that's what's being conveyed. We can talk about if this
But under the
application needs
tax
to be.
map, under the county, it's MWP.
It's already shown as NWP.
That's what it shows up as.
Oh,
It says Madison Whip, you know, 3995, Madison Whip Preservers, Inc. No, that's the one.
I think you resolve that just by making sure that the owner matches the
yeah. Goodness knows
Yeah,
who
that's all
that-
I'm trying to say is,
Yeah.
I mean, if Bill Price has it, he should be the one, but if MWP owns it, they should be on
Right,
the
and
application.
If the
John,
tax map shows it as NWP, then he's not the owner.
Well, that's
He
what
owns-
it's showing on the
Yeah,
tax
yeah.
map anyway.
Yeah, we
I don't
would
know
have
who
to
owns it.
pull a deed. I wouldn't always trust, I mean, GIS, sure, we can look at that, but if we're gonna get into the true owner, I think we will wanna clarify that through deed of ownership.
Well, I mean, don't you think that should be the same
Yeah, that has to
for
be,
rezoning?
that's gotta be clear to begin with, yeah.
It seems like to me, the bigger problem is what Steve and Jim said, if you can't do a boundary adjustment.
Yeah.
That's the bigger problem we need to solve.
Well, they don't necessarily have to. I mean, they can just keep this as it.
Well,
is
I think
and
the
ask for
concern is if in the future they go to move dirt, I mean, they've hired engineers, because one of the things we made it clear from get-go is that, if this is your intent, you know, the lengthiness doesn't come from this group. It's gonna come from DEQ's review. So that I know they have obtained engineers to do that. So their concern is, you know, doing that work, and then does a building land on just one parcel, or is it gonna have to be positioned where it's gonna be on two, or things of that nature? And I know the answer could be, well, the engineer could figure that out, but that would be a concern I have. If the lay of the land and the site work fits the building to go here, but it just so happens that building, 20 feet of it sits on one tax map and 100 feet on the other, you know.
I think it makes no sense whatsoever that it's restricted to A1 and C1. The other item I had, Jonathan, was on Article 16.
Okay.
As weak as that provision is, the development impact statement, it's kind of mixed metaphors in here. Part of it's actually physical impact, part of it's economic impact. I don't think the physical impact, which should be of greater concern to this body, And that's the cost to the county. I mean, fire suppression, I think, would be about the only thing that we would see as additional costs. But the ordinance is there, and we need to figure out how to work around it.
So I guess so I definitely appreciate that, question and raise of issue. I guess my question would be for this body, would that, Article 16, be looked at, during the site plan phase, or is there a preference? Because I'm looking through it right now to see if it really would be interpreted in a way of when it should be. Should it be for a rezone? Would it be during a site plan application phase? Would be my question. I don't mean to answer your question with a question, but I think it's a very good point you bring. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But I still, so I would, my comment on that right now is, yes, we need to look at that. I think the way I would treat it is say we would look at that during the site plan submittal, application submittal, excuse me. The bigger issue, from staff standpoint, I'm gonna have to go back and really look at is this boundary line adjustment.
That may be a moot point. They're not actually adjusting the boundary line. They want to vacate the boundary line.
That is correct. Excuse me, that is
They
correct.
just said it wrong. The
Uh,
vacating a boundary line, I don't think is specifically mentioned, is it?
Well, I've got it up on the screen
Yeah,
now.
is vacating also mentioned?
By the same owner resulting in a single boundary lot ultimate consolidation. So long as it's a conforming lot, cannot create a split zone parcel. So that's where you want, definitely you need to have that rezone first. I think Mr. Elliott asked that question. So you definitely want the rezone first, so you don't have a split zone. And then it requires, subject properties be deeded in the same name as shown on the tax records. They require an executed deed of consolidation affirming the lot line, vacation. So yes, that's a very good point. So there may be the saving grace that it is a vacation of boundary line. It's not because they want to consolidate the tax map parcel. It's not moving or enlarging one of the other parcels.
But to Mr. Elliott's point, it is a two-step process.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And the rezone has to happen first.
Yes, sir.
And it'll have to end up both parcels being the same name.
Yes, sir.
So they will probably want to make clear in their application that the owner is Madison Wood Preservers also, instead of leaving Bill Price on there as an individual owner.
Okay.
Because assuming the rezoning is granted, then he would have to sell it again to get it in the proper name, unless it's already. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm tracking my notes here. We will work with getting the name correction of owner and so forth on the application. I'm going to follow up on well and septic of that parcel. We've established rezoning needs to occur first before the lot line vacation. Fiscal impact or development impact, if Plan Commission is okay and the Board of Supervisors, we will consider that during the site plan application. I think that's all the notes I have at this time. Did I capture?
Jonathan, we could tell the applicant, I assume, that if on the rezoning, you could rezone that night, and you could do the boundary of vacation right after that, so you could do it all at one time?
Yes.
We ought to do a search for 2-40 to see if it appears anywhere else. That's the definition for
I'm on the,
vacation of a boundary line.
you talking about what 2-4 currently says?
We ought to see where there are restrictions.
This is what was approved, and this is that new feature I told everybody about, that what's pending. it's weird because I can see it, but it's pending publication. So what's that? Well, yeah, it's in the minutes, and I also have it on the screen. Let me enlarge it, definitely for my eyes. In our ordinance? Okay. All right, let me go back to. So what I'm doing, if that was a search, maybe I should say vacating, not vacation of lot lines. I'm assuming they're the same. When I do a search within the whole ordinance, it brings up the following. And I can go into these. Are you looking for a specific for the definitions, or we can go into section 4 or 5 lots?
The Articles 311, 411, and Article 4-1-5 are all specifically talking about the time period involved following a boundary line adjustment. They do not say that you can't do a boundary line adjustment anywhere else. The problem is that there's no specific allowance for it, I guess we would say. It's not specifically allowed in the others. So we have to decide if that lets us do it anyway.
That for a boundary line adjustment. The vacating lot lines, it appears that it's allowed as long as you file the deed and.
Yeah, at this point, all we've done is to define it and say it's not considered a subdivision.
Yeah, we haven't made an ordinance for it, right?
Right. We haven't
We
made any
haven't really
ordinance
said
to say-
anything other than defining it.
Right.
For allowing a boundary line adjustment in M2, is that what you're
Yeah.
talking about? But we have established the vacation of lot lines that would allow that to occur.
We defined what it
yeah.
is. Right.
All right, let me ask
So-
another question. It's defined, even if it's not referenced in another ordinance, are we saying that's permissible or not?
That's
Because
what we need to decide.
well, let me throw one out there. We're gonna talk about one here shortly, home occupation.
Yeah.
It's
We
defined.
need to talk to our legal
Okay.
representative. I guess what it boils down to, in uses, special uses and so forth, anything that's not specifically allowed is not permitted.
That
Do
is
we follow
correct for
that?
uses, yep.
Yeah, do we follow that line? Or since it's not specifically mentioned anywhere else?
Oh, that's generally not statutory construction.
Right.
So, you want Mr. Gregg to give you all right. So, but the question that's being posed that I will discuss with legal is, there's a definition, but does that allow an action or allow staff to administratively allow vacation of boundary lines? Can it be done?
Right.
Is it prohibited or not?
Yeah.
Okay,
Following the order of the rezoning and then
okay.
vacate the line.
Basically, if that's not the format of the rest of the, it's not, in other words, it's not treated the same as our uses in zoning. If it's treated differently, then it's not a problem.
Okay.
Because I think Jim pretty exhaustively searched all of the rest of the ordinances to find all the locations where boundary line adjustments were mentioned.
Okay, we will have legal look at that, and I guess for that matter, we'll have that for future consideration, but let me ask you this, is that, I mean, we'll try to work to have that for this rezoning part. Is that a decision point for this commission to consider the rezoning?
problems they might encounter.
for the next steps.
Right, since we know he
Okay.
plans to do this, yeah.
Okay. I do think all these are good questions. You kind of got to ask those other next step questions. I'm just trying to make sure the time and the information I have, if we can have it by then, we will, but will it be a pinch point for your decision for rezoning? So I understand you've clarified that for me.
Yeah, as far as rezoning, it doesn't look like, well, it's obviously not changing the nature of the surrounding community that much. I mean, it is gonna be bounded by R1 or R2 lots, but it already was anyway.
So speaking of that, being from just a rezoning
Yep.
place, should we have anything in there about them putting some kind of buffers between that and the other R2s, R1s? There's 5 other lots there with 4 other owners.
I don't
Now,
know if you
we
would
can
do
look at
that
in the
for,
Site plan for what's after that, but just, I think if we said we didn't know what was going on there and somebody just wanted to rezone it, we would probably impose some kind of a barrier.
for site plan though, correct? You're not saying for rezone?
No, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about that.
Well, no, I'm only asking because it's good questions to
Okay, so
ask.
if you said, we're, okay, just from a rezoning, if we're not looking any farther into anything else, and they came in and I want to rezone this from where it is to what it is now, and we're backed up to some R2s, would we be saying that, okay, well, to put an M1 there, we want you to put some kind of buffers in there between that and the R1, R2?
So staff's answer to that would not be you would have a requirement in your rezone. You would handle that through your site plan. We have done that. Let me think of some reasons. We've done some rezoning, that little salvage dealership over on James City Road that has some split zoning, and the rezone did not cover that. His special use, what's that? The muffler shop on Shelby. We didn't cover the buffering concept in the rezone. It was covered in the special use permit application. So we have it now. That's a good question. Does this commission want to, or the board, consider put conditions in rezoning? It hasn't been typical. It's been handled at the site plan or a special use permit, but that's up to you. I'm just giving you feedback on what we've done.
It's just a hypothetical question.
Yes, sir.
I mean, I'm sure we
There
could
are
do
some
that
trees there
inside.
now on that back portion. I guess the Oots family planted those when they had it. There is some vegetation now, but
I can tell you most of those trees, because I was helping when that was originally cleared, most of those trees are on the private house side.
okay,
And
on their
not-
parcel.
Because we cleared everything that was on Bill's property.
Okay,
All that was done. If there was a tree on it, he wanted it gone.
okay. My recommendation would be to handle any of your buffering alls, whether it be a special use permit or in this case, a site plan. We did that, and he's got an engineer now working, but Mr. Weaver had a business or something he applied for there on Shelby Road. And we required buffering down, and we did it at that time as application. So generally, it's an SUP or something of that nature where you start putting those conditions of buffering and all that other, like downward facing light or whatever conditions you want to put on it.
Yeah, the closest equivalent we've had recently would be the solar farm thing. And that, they insisted on doing that together all the whole way, the zoning and the SUP.
Right.
So we really couldn't separate them on that.
Right. Okay.
But that was an SUP.
Yeah.
And this
Well,
is going
they
to be
wanted to
by
rezone
right
it,
once
yeah.
it's rezoned.
You would have comment, though, at the site plan phase.
And authority to
Yes,
require.
yes.
Well, I'm just gonna, since I already turned my mic on. My main concern, honestly, is just gonna be traffic coming in and out of the place. I'm assuming they're investing, I don't know, $5 million. They're expecting a upturn in revenue and business, more trucks coming in and out more efficiently. It's already a challenging place for those trucks to get in and out.
And it's a good point you raise. Our discussion in the development committee, we had VDOT here. They did not say, you're gonna have to do this or that. There was some discussion around it. I think both parties are amenable to work together, whatever improvements. Madwood's not saying we're gonna do them, or nor is VDOT at this time saying you're required to do them. Their plan, is to use,
They're not gonna use the road there at the intersection, they're gonna come out
Correct.
down through the bottom of the,
correct.
down by the bottom of the.
Let me see how I can
office
illustrate
park built down.
this.
Right, they're using their existing commercial entrance, yeah.
They will
That
use
gives
their,
it a chance to spread out some before it gets to the light.
this is the best picture I have, or I can go to GIS overview. Can you see my cursor okay, or my mouse, my arrow, if you will? So if you're coming down Oak Park, here, you make a right now to go into their establishment, or you can either go here to their new madhouse, or whatever they call it, this employee initiative, or you can come down to the administrative office in the receiving department. This darker shaded area where the number of buildings are, that would be the widen and the open and the entrance where the staging area where it occur. You would come in here and meander up. I guess this is like an attendant building that does whatever, I don't know if they log people in or whatever. And then you move, you either stage or you're moving in this area and then potentially around over here. So they would not have any, this is an enhancement off, their entrance kind of starts back in here. So they would just open up through here is their plan. VDOT is aware of that plan, but again, they stated at that meeting, you know, when site plan and all that comes in, when they'll give their official comment.
And I might try to add one thing there. At the development meeting, I don't know if you remember, one of the things that she commented on, that they're getting, some days they're getting so many deliveries at the same time that they're getting trucks backed up. If I understood it correctly, they're even getting trucks backed up onto Oak Park Road.
Well, what they do is when they reached kind of that critical mass point, they have, I don't know who their appointed employee is, but they send someone up there to make sure they're keeping traffic off of Oak Park to prevent that. So they kind of have this critical mass point. Once certain amount of trucks, I don't know if it was 16 or 17, they can hold. When they get near that critical mass, they start working. They have employees that move them so they're not causing congestion on 29 or Oak Park.
But, I mean, originally, I think her point was that as their shipping facility now is basically overburdened, this expansion would just be to handle essentially the business that they're doing now, bringing in supplies and shipping out.
Right.
So they're not actually talking about expanding the amount of traffic.
Well, if I lived there, Steve, I would like a wood yard there a whole lot better than I would have liked those chicken houses there.
Yeah. Or R2.
Especially one that's relatively well run right now.
I'd rather have a Bojangles there myself.
Yeah,
Well, and it was R2, so that would have allowed for more density. So it's a very, very good point. So that is their plan, and my apologies, I'll reach out to Ms. Gavar tomorrow, to catch up on this. They certainly will be here for your September workshop. And as we prepare for an October public hearing.
Does anyone see any problems with the rezoning itself?
More tax dollars.
Yeah. I mean, it's, not talking about a site plan or any of those other things which we have to deal with later, but just rezoning to the end section. Yeah. It's not changing not a significant change, because that huge area is already zoned into. And they're aware of I like words and I hate not being able to remember them. There are distances required at the boundaries between setbacks, that's the word, yeah. They know the setback requirements because they'll be adjoining R2, which means there's a specific setback requirement for M2 adjoining something different.
Yes, I believe, and again, they're not here tonight, but they've They've had, I think, maybe some stakeout or some initial measurements. So again, they have assured me they have hired an engineering firm that has began that. So, which that's encouraging. It tells you the seriousness of it. I do know Ms. Gavaria had the blessing of the board of directors because they have to vote on things. So that was the process it took before it even made it our way. But yes, they're aware of the setbacks and their engineering. First, again, the rezoning process, but assuming they're, get that and they move forward to site plan, they'll definitely have to meet all those requirements, not only from the county's ordinance, but whatever VDOT might have concerns.
Yeah, well, my point, I guess, is this is being done professionally. They're aware of all the ordinances that are applicable here. So, it's not like we're saying somebody wants to rezone 2 blocks in Madison and they're gonna turn it into a spa or something. They know exactly what they're doing, and they already know, they've got the engineers that know what they're doing.
Yeah, yes, sir. I feel confident. The staff is not designing or coaching. We're definitely, though, making available and citing ordinances. They've asked questions about the process, and that's why we're at rezoning first. So they're well aware of that. And it sounds like their engineer is already underway. So.
Any other discussion, question, comment? Any public comment?
Let me run back here real
You wanna
quick.
run back?
Just
Okay.
to see.
We'll observe all the forms, since I actually remembered it tonight.
Still one person watching, but no comment, chat box or anything.
We actually have somebody watching. Okay.
It says one participant, I don't know if somebody logged in and sitting in this room, but.
Yeah, maybe James is doing it down in Florida. Okay. Last new, you doubt it. Last new business, proposed amendment to Appendix 1 of the zoning ordinance, Article 20-98, definition, home occupation.
All right, sorry.
Yes.
All right, okay, I'm sorry. I needed to wait on being recognized. My apologies. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to bring you up to date of where we're at. I want to bring up the current definition in case you all want to look at that, as well as compare what actually was being proposed. Here we go. So I'll keep that ready. And then we'll go to the packets. So last time we discussed this, there was a lot of emphasis on what's an employee or defined as employee, and so forth. I think the ordinance clearly, looks at this if a person who is choosing to run a business, if they reside on the premises or not. Certainly, if it's just them that reside on the premises doing the work, it's by right. It's when you have employees on site, less than 3, which 1 or 2, you'd have to have a special use permit. So what was attempted here, and staff and legal has worked on this, and we've gotten some feedback from some commissioners, so I think we've maybe encompassed some of that language in here. We have defined, and I'm going to highlight here, an employee regularly employed on site, what that means. I know there was some discussion of what about slow days, maybe you're getting them to do some cleanup or washing of vehicles. So what we've said is regularly employed on site means working for more than 2 hours per day on the premises. The other addition added is this last sentence: the business owner must reside on the premises. So that is really the meat, if you will, of the proposed ordinance amendment. And I'm happy to take any questions or take any notes or feedback that you, Mr. Chair, or the board our planning commission, may have. Certainly, Mr. Gregg, if you have any comments, please, by all means.
Thank you, Mr. Weekly. Something to remember about these types of ordinances, and we have plenty of them. You have to remember the county has limited resources in terms of what it can actually enforce. These are typically enforced whenever there is a problem within a neighborhood or among neighbors. The idea behind this, and I think what has driven this entire process, is giving the county a tool to resolve these types of conflicts with neighbors. In other words, when would this be enforced? Whenever a neighbor has said, hey, look, he's got 30 people over there, and he's not allowed to have that, or whatever the violation might be. If there is somebody who's there, maybe there are 4 people over there for 20 minutes or whatever, it's not as though the county is going to have anybody out there looking, but the spirit of these, and this is really kind of true across the board, ordinances are designed to modify behavior, but more importantly, to correct bad behavior. A fair example is occasionally I have seen people drive by state troopers at 56, 57, 58 miles an hour, and they have not been stopped by that state trooper. It's kind of the same thing. It's, some people call it prosecutorial discretion, but the idea is if you have these tools available, law enforcement, or in this case, it would be the county, has yet another tool to take care of, regulating or moderating disputes among neighbors, which is really the entire purpose of government, is trying to make sure that human beings can get along with each other.
Thank you. Any other question for Jonathan or for Mr. Craig?
So are we looking at this whole thing as a whole again and trying to redo this?
I think
So I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, please.
At our last meeting, that question was raised, because this is a very specific remedy, I think, as directed by the Board of Supervisors for this particular situation. The problems that Jim located in the ordinances as they stand are not addressed here at all. So personally, I think maybe at some point after the comp plan is finished, we may ask the Board of Supervisors if they want us to look into, among other things, this in terms of how it's approached in our ordinances, because there are some potential problems, I think, in the way this is approached.
So in
Not-
other words,
not
we're
the
just
definition.
looking at it as it is and trying to clarify it.
Yeah, this is
So the-
clarifying the definition, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I know that there was, when this was mentioned at our last meeting, there was some question about what exactly we were talking about, which is just exactly what you were saying. This is a much more specific, just the definition clarification. Any other discussion or question or comment for Jonathan?
Maybe a comment, Steve. And the reason I say this comment is because I know of some situations of this in the county. In the last sentence right there, it says business owner must live on site. What about, could you put in there, or do you even want to put in there, supervisor should live on site along with business owner should live on site? Because a lot of people have owned a place and they letting their supervisor live there, and the owner of it's not living there, but he has his supervisor there that's supervising his men. That's just a question.
Not sure. I guess my response, I appreciate that. I guess my response to that question is take that into consideration with any additional concerns. So to Mr. Carpenter's recommendation, maybe after the comp plan, add that to that list. The direction given to myself and ultimately tasking the planning commission was, these are the areas that the Board of Supervisors wish to address in the ordinance now, and they would like the planning commission to review those, the ordinance itself, but specifically those areas. So clearly defining as I mentioned, those two areas, regularly employed on site, what that means. And then a business owner must reside on the premises. I do hear your point, sir. If the commission, I think it's a good suggestion that Mr. Carpenter made, maybe those items that, along with Mr. Smith, Mr. Elliott, and any others may have on the commission, pick that up during that additional review period, or point of time. And allow this or let this continue through the process. This has been advertised for the public hearing on September the 4th. So that's really only comments I have around it. Certainly it's your meeting, but you have two board members here tonight. Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you want to ask them anything, but that was the directive I was given.
I would just say to me, we're talking about the definition of a home occupation. And when you're talking about a home occupation, you're talking about working from your home. And there could be another thing, but that sounds like a business.
Any other question, comment, discussion? Any remaining problems that you see with the definition?
I've still questioned about the 5 horsepower thing. I mean, but we're not really looking at changing it, so there's no point in it. But if we were to change it, I would want to look at that and really define what that really is.
Yeah, it's a historical
that's a-
artifact.
Yes, so maybe.
No, that's a great point, and
We want to revisit
because you
that.
don't buy electric motors now by horsepower. You buy by- And Mr. Elliott had a really good point on that. The reason, I think, Pete, for that comment is that we did not want to have straw men just dropping on Madison County property and running businesses out of it, calling it a home business.
I think for me, Mr. Chairman, this is an improvement. But when I read it, it's still, if I were to apply this to a recent case that got swept away, where it says where there is no evidence that would indicate from the exterior of the building that is being utilized in whole or part for purpose other than a dwelling, that case would not fall under the definition of a home occupation. Based on the amount of trucks and trailers and equipment. I mean, to me, if I rode by that, I wouldn't say somebody lives there. I'd say somebody's running a business from their house.
And going to what you're trying to regulate, that's why having a tool in the toolbox is helpful.
I think the problem is, though, is we want to make freedom for people to do things to a point where they can to have a home occupation or build a business.
I understand completely,
But then there's
but you still have to get on with your neighbors. And again, sometimes that's the purpose of these local government ordinances.
Any other comment or discussion on this? All right, so at this point, Jonathan, this is at the joint meeting on September 4th, right?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
So, unless there's any further comment, public comment? Is it worth taking the walk all the way back there, Jonathan?
I can for
No,
proper,
that's okay.
or Mr. Gordon will do it for proper procedure. You're not looking to adjourn yet, are you, sir? Or-
No, we've still got, what was it?
All right, I didn't know if you were going to cover the other
No, I'm
one.
trying, but we're getting there.
Okay, my apologies, I just,
That's okay. No public comment, thank you, sir. Okay, unfinished business, Yates Properties of Madison LC, site plan application. Case number SP-05-08-24. Yates Properties of Madison LC has filed a site plan application for property located on 4956 South Seminole Trail, Madison, Virginia, and further identified by tax map number 55-14. The site location is further described as being located on the west side of 29 Seminole Trail, just north of the intersection with Route 662, Shelby Road. The property contains a total of 10.684 acres and is zoned as Industrial Limited, or M1. The project, known as Self-Storage of Madison Addition, is proposing to construct a new 12,000 square foot self-storage building and travel aisles. Pursuant to Appendix 1 of zoning, Article 9-1-25, storage facilities are a by right use in the M1 zoning district. The total project site area is 8.758 acres. A total of approximately 1.38 acres will be disturbed during construction. Note, applicant is still working to resolve electric and drain field issue. Anticipate being resolved for September PC workshop and advertised for October public hearing. Okay, Jonathan, anything to add?
Saw my typo, that should be working to resolve, not resolved, so I'll fix that. The reason why I feel good about the anticipation it will be resolved, I spoke to Hinchy and Baines. They are the engineer for Mr. Yates on this project. They were informed they were not to be put as far as unfinished business to discuss this with you all tonight, but not as far as their full second workshop run, because we want to see these items corrected before you fully review it. So they are working to resolve the electrical issue. They believe they're very close on that. The drain field issue, they're working with the health department. And basically, we would need either, if they're going to have a shared use, they need to have some type of easement that would show that, or if they're doing a new drain field, which I believe is one of their options, we need to know that VDH has seen that, is fine with that, and they have their proper primary and reserve locations. So Mr. Hinchy has said that he feels very adamant they'll have that resolved and ready to come back for their second time for the workshop in September, and then that would be advertised for the October public hearing. So close, but still have to get those issues resolved that matter before bringing back to the workshop.
Okay, and of course, these were the two issues that were developed at the original workshop.
Yes, sir. Mr. Snyder identified those, and we want to make sure that, hearing directly from the engineer on record of where they're at in the process. So they were still working on things at the time of this packet being published, so I didn't feel like it would be appropriate to bring them back to a workshop. Let them come back in September.
Okay, this is for the September workshop.
Yes, sir.
Any question for Jonathan on this? Okay. Any other comment? Not quite. We still, I'm trying. We're working on it. All right, let's see. This is just, you want me to read it?
It's
Jonathan?
just, I could do it real quick, because I'm with Mr. Smith on that. We just do this customary to let you know upcoming public hearings. So Trail Bites has been scheduled for September the 4th, public hearing, and then the proposed amendment that you all just heard or discussed here tonight, home occupation, is also been properly advertised and scheduled for a public hearing. And that is all staff has for the night, sir.
Okay, and those, as far as we know, those are the only two cases on that meeting?
Yes, sir. For a public hearing, yes, sir.
Might be a nice short meeting then. Okay, thank you, sir. Any other items from the planning commission, staff, or public? Any other comments, questions? All right, in that case,
Move to adjourn?
motion's been made and seconded to adjourn. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. 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 Any opposed? Thank you.